Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the 5th of our Torah Fund Stands with Israel series. I'm Barbara Ezring, the International Chair of Torah Fund. Since 1942, Torah Fund has been the designated philanthropy of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. We are so proud to celebrate the 80th anniversary of Torah Fund. Before we begin, we have muted everyone so that we will all be able to hear our presenters without any background noise. We will answer questions after the presentations. Please send your questions via the chat to Janet Kirshner. She'll be monitoring the questions. You also may click on reactions and then click raise your hand at the appropriate time for questions. It is my honor to acknowledge Women's League for Conservative Judaism International President, Debbie Kaner-Goldich, and to welcome our past international presidents of Women's League and past international Torah Fund chairs who are in attendance this evening. Also participating tonight are Madeline Gimbel and Janet Kirshner, International Torah Fund Vice Chairs. Torah Fund supports programs and scholarships for students at the 5 Global Institutes of Higher Learning of the Conservative Masorti movement, including the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles, Schechter Institutes of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano in Buenos Aires, and Zacharias Frankel College in Potsdam, Germany. Thanks to the generosity of donors for 8 decades, we have raised over $107 million. We are unusual in that our dedicated fundraisers are all volunteers from Women's League's affiliates of conservative synagogues throughout the United States and Canada. Funds raised further important educational initiatives and special education projects for the training of our future rabbis, cantors, teachers, scholars, and Jewish community leaders. Thousands of committed Torah Fund donors help strengthen and ensure the future of the Jewish people worldwide. We invite you to donate to Torah Fund by clicking on the link that we will be providing in the chat. Torah Fund is hosted by the Jewish Theological Seminary, where Torah Fund staff members administer the philanthropy's outreach, engagement, promotion, donation, and data processing activities in tandem with the wide network of Torah Fund volunteers. We're excited to present this series in support of Israel. We hope you will find it informative and educational.
I'd like to now introduce to you Rabbi Ariel Stofenmacher, who will give our Dvar Torah. Rabbi Stofenmacher is the president and rector of Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano. A professor of rabbinic literature and leadership, he serves as the founding director of the Center for the Study of Halacha and the editor of the academic journal Machshavot. A member of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly, Rabbi Stofenmacher is committed to the development of the Jewish community in Ibero-America and the strengthening of the global Masorti movement. He is married to Rabbi Marcela Goralnik, and they have 3 children. Rabbi Stofenmacher.
Hi. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I love to be here with you all. It's a great pleasure to be associated with the Women's League and the Torah Fund. On behalf of the seminary students, I thank you for all your efforts. Regarding this brief Dvar Torah, I will do something quite strange today. I will speak a little bit about Israel and the Christian world, and a little bit about the Jewish world. So, as you know, we are in the year number 60 since the Vatican Council II, yeah, that began in '62. And we celebrated last year the 50th anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Yeshua Heschel. So I will use these two events to analyze briefly the relationship between Christianity, Judaism, theology, and Israel. As for sure you know, the Vatican Council II was initiated by Pope John XXIII and finished by Pope Paul VI. And it was essentially related to the Christian faith and the unity between the different Christian churches. But also there was a very much important chapter, which was the relation of the church with the non-Christian religions. In particular, what is important to us is the relationship with the Jewish world. And the council produced a document which is worldwide known as Nostra Aetate in Latin, which means our era, our time, where it delineates the relationship, the new relationship between the church and the Jews. As you know, the history of the relationship of the church and the Jews is very simple. After Paul created Christianity, the history was that the New Testament replaced the Old. So Israel is no longer the chosen people, and the new chosen people is the Christian world. And in order to complete with the second coming, the theology of Jesus, Jews must be converted. In a nutshell, that's what it is. But then comes this council, and Nostra Aetate says, I quote, God does not repent of its gifts. Meaning that if God wants, in the Bible said that we are chosen people, or the Jewish people is what it is, so it must continue being so. So there's no replacement. And also I quote the document which says, the church rejects any discrimination based on race, color, condition, and religion. Changing these very few words, the whole history. As you know, now I'm introducing Rabbi Yeshua Heschel. Heschel and Cardinal Agostino Bea were the main characters which wrote the draft of the Nostra Aetate Declaration back in the 60s. Heschel wrote after that a book, a very interesting book, called Israel, an Echo of Eternity. Israel, an Echo of Eternity. And there he shows us the profound theological impact of Israel, both on Jews and Christians, in particular after the council. For us, he says, and I believe he's absolutely right, Israel is Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu, the beginning of the emerging or the surge of our redemption. It means like Israel is in the middle of the process of the way to get to the Messianic era, because Israel could only be created, the state of Israel I'm speaking, under God's will. But as you know, not every Jew thinks like this. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, Haredim, do not agree with this. They say that the state of Israel shouldn't have been created until the Mashiach comes. And there's part of the problems we have in Israel now, and maybe the ambassador will explain us a little bit more. But for us, pluralistic Jews, in the state of Israel, people of Israel, land of Israel, and the book of Israel all come together as one. From the other side, for the Christian world, after Nostra Aetate, Israel, the state of Israel, should be taken as the strong demonstration of the love of God to the Jewish people. Why? Because the mere existence of Israel shows us the fulfilling of God's promises, of the prophet's prophecies. Because if not, Israel would not be there. I'm quoting Heschel in the book I've said, and he says, to the eyes of the heart, it is clear that returning to the land of Israel, of course, is an event in accord with the hidden presence of God in Jewish history. So for Heschel, our coming back is part of our story. As you might remember, in 1986, when John Paul II visited the Sinagoga Maggiore in Rome, he said that we are the elder brothers in the faith of the Christian world. All this stuff we've said led us that in 1993, the Holy See and the State of Israel began official diplomatic relations, and that was absolutely turning point theologically, putting an end, hopefully, to 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. Well, from my part, that's all, only the last few words. In these very complicated days where the terror and death cover our beloved Israel, I bring Heschel's voice from the same book and his dreams of reconciliation and his hope and ours that violence will end and Arabs and Jews could leave hatred aside and embrace love and cooperation. Thank you for everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your inspiring words. It is now my privilege to introduce His Excellency Itai Bardov. Ambassador Bardov joined the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs in April 2006, taking on his current role as Ambassador of Israel to Panama, Caribbean countries, and CARICOM in July 2021. Prior to this, he was director of the Israeli consulates in the USA Department at the North American Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, before which he served as spokesperson for the Embassy of Israel in Washington. Earlier, he was director of the Foreign Ministry's Cadet Course, deputy head of mission at the Embassy of Israel in Croatia, and head of the political department at the Israeli Embassy in Jordan, among other appointments. With a degree in political science and international relations from the Open University of Israel and a master's degree in business administration from Ono Academic College, he speaks Hebrew, English, Spanish, and Arabic. He is married and the father of 3. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure being here with you all and seeing all these squares in front of me. Thank you again for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. As we discussed, I'll give like a 10-minute presentation, speak a little bit about Israeli Panamanian relations, a bit about the region. And then, I'm happy to open this to Q&A. We'll make a deal. You can ask any question and I'll do the best to my diplomatic capabilities in avoiding the difficult ones. So Israel and Panama, the relations are really good relations. This is not just me being diplomatic, they really are good relations. Panama recognized Israel was one of the first countries to recognize Israel. It voted for Israel voted the UN in 1947 for the state for a Jewish state. It's interesting, but it is actually one of 2 countries, the other one being Mexico in all of Latin America, not to recognize a Palestinian state. There's a vibrant Jewish community in Panama, around 15,000 people. The majority belong to a community called Shevet Achim, which are Sephardic Orthodox. There's a Ashkenazi Orthodox community as well, and there's a conservative slash reform community as well. Beit El is the Ashkenazi Orthodox, and Kol Sherit Israel is the reform conservative reform community. Although there are religious and ideological differences between them, they do know how to work together as a political arm, for things to do with Israel or with the Jewish community as a whole in Panama. And besides that, I would say the relationship that we have with Israel, with Panama, is based on quite a few different issues. And one of them is that, Panama isn't really concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. So what happens there doesn't really affect the relations. There's a very small Muslim community here as well. Well, about maybe the same size as the Jewish one. There's a Muslim community here, which is a very moderate community. It does not, it does not have any radical elements to it. If there is this war going on in Gaza, you might see some people from that community and others going to the streets to demonstrate, but really in small numbers, and it's definitely what you guys are accustomed to see in the U.S. There's a story about the Jewish community that I think is interesting to note, that a day after the bombing in Argentina against the Jewish community in Argentina, just one day after, there was an airplane, a local airplane, Alas Chiricana 901, which is what was a Panamanian local air carrier that flew from Panama to Colón, another city in Panama. And out of the 20 people on that plane, 21 people, 12 were Jews. 4 of them had an Israeli passport. And that plane exploded, and everyone on board was killed. And till this day, there isn't a real official recognition of what caused it, but the Jewish community here is certain that that was an attack linked to the attack in Argentina, and that was a terrorist attack aimed at Jews and Israelis. But beside that, there's a large evangelical community in Panama, which is very supportive of Israel. We have close relations. And in that regard, I think I have a pretty good position here, because I have an open channel to the government here. Israel is working on quite a few issues with the Panamanians in technologies, in agriculture, water, and so forth. And actually, in 2 weeks' time, I'll be joining a high-level delegation led by the Panamanian foreign minister, together with other 2 more ministers and others, to Israel for a 5-day trip. And that is going to be a part of our attempts to strengthen and broaden the relations between both countries. I'm looking forward to that. Beside that, I have to say Panama is a very typical Central American country, with all the positives and negatives to it. If you look at what's happening in Latin America, a lot of the countries in Latin America are kind of moving very leftward. The latest example is Brazil, with Lula taking the presidency instead of Bolsonaro. But we've seen that in Chile with Boric, and in Colombia with Petro, and in Mexico, Honduras. Panama, in that regard, is a very politically central, even maybe a little right when it comes to economically oriented country. It has a very close relationship with the United States. The relationship with the United States is a kind of rather ambivalent one. It's a very pro-American country, but it does have some, history with the U.S. Surrounding the canal, the Panama Canal, which was transferred to Panama under the Carter administration, the famous Carter-Torrijos agreement, which transferred the canal from the United States to Panama. But many Panamanians feel historically that the United States kind of used Panama to make a profit through the canal. Although if it weren't for the United States, we wouldn't have had the Panama Canal. So there's it. And also, I don't know how many people of you are familiar with the invasion, the US invasion to Panama in 1989, when Colonel Noriega was the leader here. And that also has, many Panamanians are very grateful to the US for intervening and restoring democracy, but others remember the pain and the casualties that were inflicted during that invasion. And actually, last year, it was officially proclaimed that December 20th, which is the date that the invasion took place, would become an official day of mourning here in Panama. So the last December, 20th December, was the first time Panamanians officially mourned that date, and everything was closed. It's an official holiday. So but I would say it's a very pro-American country, but it has it has a lot of there's a very kind of an important step that took place last week when Secretary Blinken declared the designation of the former president, Ricardo Martinelli, former president of Panama, for suspicions of bribery and corruption. And it's a very interesting step because Martinelli is going to be is a candidate for the next elections, and he is a leading candidate. I mean, he has a very good chance of becoming the president again. And it's interesting because he himself is a pro-American. He was a pro-American president. But on the other hand, the Americans say, they say that there's a lot of information about his involvement in issues of corruption. Now, back to the Israeli-Panamanian relationship, I would say that, our main focus is because politically, really, there aren't many differences. Panama tries not to get involved too much into politics outside of the region. So our main focus is on economy and trade. It's also on cultural events, partnering in different aspects. Actually, Israel, this is an agreement that we have with the Ministry of Health of Panama. Israel trains Panamanian doctors who finish their studies and they come to do their internship in Israel, in hospitals in Israel. They come for about a year or 2 years, and then they come back really professionals. This is really a great advantage for these doctors. They come back to Panama using their experience in Israel. There is a Panamanian embassy in Tel Aviv. And I think, that's in a nutshell, the relationship between Israel and Panama. I gave a bit about the US and Panama. And I just, I wanted to start, I forgot to mention, there was a terrible, like Rabbi Stofenmacher mentioned, there was a terrible terrorist attack in Jerusalem, killing 7 innocent people who were in their place of worship. And that is, it's just sad to see that, the situation in Israel between the Israelis and Palestinians is not improving at all. There's a lot of mistrust between both sides. And there have been, not here in Panama, but there have been states here in the region that have made this false equivalency between what happened in Jenin a few days ago, which was really an attempt to capture a terrorist who either perpetrated or planning to attack Israelis. And unfortunately, there were two, a woman, an elderly woman, and a Palestinian policeman who were not involved, who were killed, and the other 7 were terrorists. But that is, of course, a false equivalency, because it's not the same as a person coming with a gun and intentionally shooting towards people who are at a place of worship and who did not plan or have not done any acts of terrorism. And unfortunately, today, we heard that in Pakistan, dozens of people were murdered at a mosque, again, in a suicide bombing. And to me, it's just sad that is a situation. And I just as I condemn the killings of the 7 Jews in a synagogue, I deeply condemn the killings of innocent worshippers at a mosque in Pakistan. I think I'll stop here because I know people know better what they want to hear than what I think they want to hear. So if anyone wants to ask any question or clarifications, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Does if you have any questions, you can use the reaction button and raise your hand, or you can send your questions to Janet. Janet, I don't know if you've received any yet.
I do not see anything in my chat.
Rabbi Stofenmacher.
I have a question for the ambassador. Do you think that the right kind of government of the new Israeli government is related somehow to the resurgence of these terrorist attacks or not?
Well, first of all, the last thing I want to do is get involved into Israeli politics, which is very, very complicated politics. Now, look, we've seen attacks happening, since before the birth of the state of Israel. We can point out the different factors. I cannot, as an Israeli ambassador, speak about the actions of this government or the prior government or any government as a reason for attacks. I will leave others who are not Israeli ambassadors to give their analysis. But whatever the reasons are, this has been going on in waves, up and down. It's sometimes you see it more intense, sometimes less. And everyone has their own explanation of why it's happening. But this has been going on since before the birth of the state of Israel. And don't get me wrong, and this I'm telling as an official representative of the state of Israel. There are also Jewish terrorists. There's been terrorism, being perpetrated by Jews, but I think, it's when you look at the difference, first of all, on the quantity, but not just that, of the reactions, in the public reactions. Unfortunately, after the attacks in Jerusalem, we saw parties going on in the streets, Palestinians giving out sweets. We've seen the father of the terrorist came out and said that he's happy on this day, just as the day that his son got married. And, this kind of brainwashing and incitement definitely it will not help the Palestinians in reaching a resolution with Israel or a Palestinian state. I cannot point out on any actions of any government. I think, a big chunk of it, and this covers the whole period, has to do with incitement within the Palestinian education. Kids learning, either being indoctrinated by TV shows for children that says, the Jews took over our land and that we have to kill the Jews wherever they are because they are occupiers in our land. So, and I'm not going to refrain to any kind of government that I will leave to others to address. But thanks for the question.
Elisa, did you have a question? I saw a hand up before. Yeah, Elisa.
Hi, good evening. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ambassador.
Hi, good evening.
I would like to also hear if you could share with us about your service as ambassador for other countries in the region as well, CARICOM. I mean, it's a wide swath you have there, and it's intriguing, perhaps to others who might not understand this wonderful bilateral relationship between Israel and Panama, as to why you are there in Panama, and while there's also CARICOM in other places. So what is the reception like among your diplomatic corps colleagues and also from these other countries? Do they come to you from other countries, the government representatives, and how is that going?
That's a great question. As an ambassador here, I also cover, although I'm not stationed there, but I cover 4 Caribbean countries: Suriname, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, which is one country, and Guyana. And I'm ambassador to CARICOM, which is the Caribbean Community Organization. So that, because that's not an Israeli invention, because you cannot have an embassy in every country in the world. So what you do is you have ambassadors who cover, we have that in Africa and Asia, who cover other countries. Now, the relationship we have with these Caribbean countries, the 4 that I cover, it varies. There are some that I would say are better, some that need to be improved. I go and visit them. Some of them have an embassy, either an embassy here. Well, they'll have an embassy here in Panama, and I'll be in touch with the embassy on a daily basis. But I'm in touch also, thank God we have technology, with their foreign ministries in their countries of origin. But like, for instance, Suriname is a country that is a member of the Organization of Islamic Countries. And even though when I presented my credentials there over a year ago, had a wonderful meeting with the president and with the foreign minister. And actually, we managed to arrange a visit of the first time of the foreign minister to Israel. And not only did we go there to Israel, the foreign minister declared while we were there, he declared that Suriname is going to open an embassy in Jerusalem. Now, which of course, in Israel, that caused a big, people who never even heard about Suriname were suddenly very interested about this new country they heard about. To them, it was like Narnia. I mean, is this a made-up country? They never heard. Now suddenly they were very much interested in, what Suriname has to say and, why they're opening an embassy in Jerusalem. And also and I'll just, things got a bit of a turn, because when he got back to Suriname, the government got a big kind of negative reaction, not only because of the declaration of opening it in Jerusalem, but also because, Suriname currently is facing a financial hardship, crisis, and, do we have the funds to open a new embassy and so forth. But I have to tell you that for Suriname, for instance, if you look at their voting pattern in the UN, they used to vote against Israel in all the, on all the important resolutions, Israeli-Palestinian resolutions. In the last resolutions, one of them was a very important one with a referral to the ICJ. In the last ones, they were a no-show. Now, this is not, because they were lazy to come and vote. This was a big change in their policy. It's a very important change. So, and it just shows you how these relationships are really important. We are now trying to strengthen our relationship with Suriname economically and in other ways, and Mashav, some maybe security as well, and stuff like that. So that was Suriname. We're doing the same with Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados, I'm having a bit of a problem of presenting my credentials. It's not specifically against me. It's just, presenting credentials, you need the president, and sometimes it has to do with bureaucracy. So there, there's a lot to be done there. With CARICOM, of course, CARICOM for us is an important organization because it represents 15 countries. And each country has a vote at the UN, and that is something that is very important for us. So the Caribbean, the communities. I saw someone mention the Jewish community in Suriname. I definitely agree. Suriname I visited the Jewish community. It's a small, tiny community. It has a rich history. There's an area that where the Jews actually started in Suriname, the Juden, it's a Dutch, now I forget how it's called, the Juden something. It's a Dutch thing, which I haven't visited yet. I promised them the next time I come, I'll visit, but that is something we're actually working to have it declared as a cultural heritage, recognized cultural heritage place. And they have a beautiful synagogue in Suriname. I don't know if any of you guys, anyone here in all these squares, has ever visited a synagogue in the Caribbean area, but one of the interesting aspects is that the whole floor, all of it, is covered by sand. And there are different reasons to that, different explanations that I got, but that was interesting to see. So yeah, part of my agenda here, although my main focus is on the Israeli-Panamanian relationship, and that is where I'm based, we do try and work on strengthening relations with the Caribbean countries as well.
Thank you. Edie Myers, I think, had a question.
Okay, hi. Very interesting. I had no idea there was any kind of relationship between Panama and Israel, and I've really enjoyed your talk. I have two questions. Number one, you said that the Palestinians were so-called dancing in the streets after the last terrorist attack. Do you mean in Israel, in like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, or just on the West Bank and Gaza?
Yeah, no, we need, well, no. First of all, I have to say, not all the Palestinians. I'm just saying, there were unfortunate scenes, which, I'm happy to share because it's all on social media, and that this was in East Jerusalem, West Bank, not in Israel proper, not, we don't get to, but not in the Tel Aviv, but in East Jerusalem we saw it in the West Bank. There are fireworks and coming out with sweets, and they might not even, I'm not saying there's a majority, but this kind of scenes, when it is seen by the Israeli side, it just creates it just deepens the mistrust and the animosity between both sides. So I think that is something that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake being done by the Palestinians to blatantly come out and celebrate. And again, when I say the Palestinians, I'm talking about those who celebrated. I'm not referring to the Palestinians as a whole, but definitely it does come from the incitement within the Palestinian society. If you go and look at the textbooks, if you go and watch Palestinian TV, you'd be amazed by the amount of incitement, towards Jews and Israelis, and there's so much fake news out there. I'll just give one example. Many years ago, when I was a young officer in the army, this was in September of 1995, we were faced with Palestinians firing at us and shooting at us, and huge demonstrations. Why? Because there were excavation works being done around the Temple Mount, and there were rumors that were spread that Israel is digging tunnels under Temple Mount in order to collapse the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And these were completely false, but it was enough to spread these rumors to create hostile and violent reactions from the Palestinian street. And on that day, many Palestinians and Israelis were killed because of a rumor that was completely false. And it's very easy for Palestinians to believe any kind of evil rumor or evil saying about Israelis and about Jews, and that what makes things very difficult between both sides.
Also, I know that many Jews from Europe or wherever came to the Caribbean settled in the Caribbean before they even settled in the North America. And I was wondering if, are there any nations there that you know of have a significant Jewish population and a Muslim populations?
Unfortunately, the Jewish populations in the Caribbean countries have really diminished, and there is a rich history. You're absolutely right. They've arrived. Many of the Jews arrived there before the 17th century, the 1600s, created communities around there. But what happened? Suriname is a very good example. Many Jews left, moved to the Netherlands, for instance, or also assimilation has to do with it. But there's not the countries that I cover, but not to my knowledge, there isn't any Caribbean country that has a really strong large Jewish population. They do have Jewish communities. Barbados has an active small Jewish community as well. And I have honorary consuls in Trinidad and Tobago and in Suriname and in Barbados that are from the Jewish community. They are Jews, but these are tiny communities, a few hundred at the most, and they're really, some of them are really struggling to continue to survive and to continue the existence of the Jewish community in their countries.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet?
I do have one question on the chat right now. Why, from Marilyn Cohen, why do you think Panama has historically been pro-Israel?
That's a wonderful question. There are a few elements to that. I'll give you a story. There was a guy in the United Nations, a deputy ambassador. His name was Eduardo Morgan. He was nominated to be a member of the so-called Palestine Committee. That committee was appointed to implement or to try and work on the partition plan, on the creation of a Jewish state. He was very active. We're in the process of working on a documentary about him. He was very active, very pro Jewish state, and there's a lot of correspondence between him and the Panamanian president at the time, where he writes, we have to make sure that the Jews get a land of their own and so forth. Many Latin American countries at the time were pro a Jewish state. I think some of it maybe had to do with the fact that they didn't really matter to them. There wasn't a very strong influence from Arabs on the countries in Latin America at the time that they could persuade them not to vote for it. Some of it had to do with these Judeo-Christian or Christian roots who believed, part of their belief, that the Jews deserved a state of their own, and it's part of their belief that these are the chosen people. Or like Rabbi Stofenmacher said, maybe maybe the Christians are the Jewish people, but they have the roots of as it used to be the chosen people. But that's a really good question, which I haven't analyzed. And you know what? Now that it's up, maybe I should look into it. Because there are quite a few Latin American countries that voted. I mean, if it wasn't for Latin America, the Jews wouldn't have had a majority, and we would not have had a Jewish state. It's Guatemala. I mean, if you look at out of the 33 countries that voted for the creation of the Jewish state, a big chunk of them came from Latin America. But I have to say, I don't really know exactly why that happened, and that's a good incentive for me to really look into it and try and understand the roots for that. That's a great question.
Janet, you don't have any more questions coming in?
No, I don't see any other questions, Barbara.
And does anybody, I don't see any hands raised, so. Okay. Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was really interesting. It's something we haven't even discussed mostly, about the relationship between Panama and other nations other than the United States and Canada. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
If I can just remark, just one thing about Panama, I think, it would be good to look a little more into the American-Panamanian relationship, for the only reason that United States is historically and culturally really embedded within Panama. As I said, it's not, there are some negative feelings or historically towards the United States, but also very positive feelings. But Americans don't know that much about Panama, but the United States is definitely a very strong part of, I wouldn't say Panamanian identity, but of Panamanian history, and of how Panamanians, when they see the world, the United States is really it's just part of their own cultural and historical kind of being. So it would be very interesting for Americans to understand a little more about Panama.
It's wonderful, and hopefully we'll be able to connect with some of the women from the Reform and Conservative community. That would be fun, and that would be a really nice way to learn more about each other and our relationship.
I'd be happy to make that connection. Absolutely.
That would be lovely. Well, we'll appreciate that. Thank you. So thank you very much. And thank you, Rabbi Stofenmacher, for being with us tonight and for your very timely Dvar Torah. It was, you're correct. It was not something we were expecting, but it was really very interesting, and thank you. I also want to thank the women who worked behind the scenes to bring this program to fruition. Lisa Paul, our Torah Fund Director, Rabbi Ellen Wollens-Fields, Women's League Executive Director, and Karen Bolina, Women's League Member Relations Manager. And a very special thank you to Karen for your tech support and your Zoom hosting tonight. Thank you to everyone for your support of Israel and for your support of Torah Fund, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.